So you want to write your own first story. So you hop on your computer, you load up a Word document, and you place your fingers delicately on the keyboard, a cup of Earl Grey on your writing desk, and a pipe in your teeth that you don't actually smoke, but you hold just to look more sophisticated. It's time to write. And you get nothing. Nothing comes to mind. Your keyboard is not active, your fingers are not moving. I can't tell you the number of times that's happened to me. It doesn't matter if you have the best idea in the world, or if you're just an empty slate fresh out of your first creative writing class. The evils of starting a story plagues us all. How do you do it? How do you get started? Well, there's no exact right way to do it, but there are plenty of ways to do it wrong, I confess. I think a lot of us get caught up in the trap of, I don't have a good idea. What I'd like to do today is go over a few of the strategies I use to start a story, and I might even mention a few ways that you could possibly avoid opening a story, like things to avoid along the way. So follow along, and we might just be able to help you out. Now, there are two primary reasons one has trouble starting a story. One is that they don't know how to get an idea for their story started. And the other is that they don't know how to start writing it, even if they have the idea. Let's start by addressing the first problem. How do you develop an idea for a story? Well, there's no exact science on this, and no one can tell you exactly how to get an idea. So please don't assume you can get ideas by simply getting advice. Ideas come sporadically and naturally. True story. I was walking the beach one day at sunset, and I literally looked out at the ocean, and I thought to myself, we always hear stories of aliens abducting humans into space, but we never hear about mer people abducting humans into the sea. I then transitioned this into another thought. What if the mer people were aliens and they abducted people to their ocean planet? And from there, I created one of my first stories called Submerged, the story of a human young man who is abducted by aquatic aliens who are suffering from a disease and need this human to help them find a cure. See how random that was? It can be as simple as looking at a beach, listening to a song, or hearing a sermon. My Death Diary series idea began when I heard my Sunday school teacher talk about the angel of death in the Bible, and I thought, wow, an angel of death. I wonder what he would have to say. And away that idea went. The key is to never let your creative instincts lock up. Be open to any opportunity to create, to discover, to invent. Don't be afraid of stupid ideas, because those stupid ideas could grow into something fantastic. The question you should ask yourself is this story something I'd like to hear? If so, that's already a good start. The famous film director and producer and actor Clint Eastwood said quite often, people ask him, how do you know people will like seeing your movies? And he said, well, I'd like to see them. And that's how you get started. Now, what I can help you with is how to develop an idea. I can't give you an idea, but I can help you develop it. You need to ask yourself a few questions to start off. Here's an example. Jay and I have been friends a long time, but early in our friendship, he showed me an image of a character he named Nomad. Now, Nomad had no story, and Jay had no story to give him. It was just an idea he had. He asked if I might be able to make a story out of this character, so I got to thinking. I looked at the picture, you can see it on the screen. He looks rugged, his clothing is tattered and old, so this is likely in a pre-modern age that his story should be told in. Also, his body is glowing eyes and tattoos. It reminds me of the Avatar state from Avatar: The Last Airbender, so perhaps this is a supernatural world? Maybe he's being taken over, or he's being manipulated by a spirit. So let's roll with that information right there. Nomad's story is a story of a young man in a pre-modern world who is influenced by a supernatural spirit. Awesome, but that's just a concept. Where do we go with it? Well, I've always liked the concept of the wandering prophet or warrior, the wuxia style of Chinese literature that you see in stories like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. So let's do something similar. Nomad is a young man in a pre-modern world who is influenced by a spirit. He travels from place to place, righting wrongs and doing good. Nah, that's a little too cliche, right? Too obvious. But what if the spirit who he's working with tells him where to go? What if the spirit knows more than he does and leads him to these places like God and Moses or the prophet Elijah? And that's it. That's when it hit me. He's a prophet of some kind. The spirit is his deity who leads him to various places to do something important there, to help people or to witness to the people there. So after I got that down, I wrote a short story of nomads saving a small town in distress from bandits by defeating their leader in a show of supernatural power. Jay liked it so much, he drew a new picture and said, I designed this guy to be a villain to Nomad. Could you write a sequel with this? Okay, now it's time to take that idea I had and expand on it. If Nomad is a prophet of a spirit, then it stands to reason there might be more prophets and more spirits, right? After all, pagan gods had their own heroes and champions too. Perhaps this guy was similar. Maybe this spirit that this guy has could represent some flaw in humanity, some deeper aspect of our psyche or experience. And then I noticed his arm was missing. How'd that go missing? Was it lost in battle? Was it sacrificed for someone he loved? Or was it... And I'll leave the rest for you to figure out. Because that's the beauty of developing an idea. Building by asking questions. Don't ever settle for, okay, I've got it all figured out. Nothing to worry about here. I'm good to go. Always assume there's more to unearth and answer about your story. Always push the limits of what you know. Interview characters. Ask questions about the world you build. Never be afraid of the question why, because answering that question will help establish something grander down the line. But now let's get to that second problem. Let's say, okay, Raven, I've got my idea. I just don't know how to start writing it. How do I do that? Well, let's talk about that. The first thing to remember in terms of telling a story is that you have to establish the status quo and the tone. In any story, be it action, adventure, horror, romance, comedy, a standard or setup must be provided. There are a few ways to do this. One common way to do it, particularly with long and drawn-out epics that take place outside of our reality or world, is what's called an exposition dump. Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Tangled, and various other stories have done this. Essentially, the story begins by telling us directly the status of the world, or the setup for the plot. This isn't a bad method necessarily, as it's very easy to digest. It allows the audience to receive plenty of information about your world and characters before getting thrown into a world they're unfamiliar with, and it can help set a tone for your story. But it needs to follow a few rules. Firstly, the information given has to be short. The longer you take to give your exposition, the more bored your audience will become. You readers need the information, but if you give them page after page after page of backstory just to set up the story they're going to hear, they will lose a lot of interest quickly. The key here is to give only the bare minimum necessary. For example, Lord of the Rings set the tone very early in its story, where it was in the Fellowship of the Ring with an eerie, ethereal voice whispering to us of the changing world. This sucked us into the monologue.
I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. That once was is lost, for none now live who remember it.
She then explained the forging of the Rings of Power, and through this introduced us to the three primary races of Middle-earth: elves, dwarves, and humans, while also giving us a rough idea of their numbers, their status, and how they're viewed.
It began with the forging of the great rings. 3 were given to the elves, 7 to the dwarf lords, and 9 rings were gifted to the race of men.
And after that, she introduced the villain and what he was after, as well as how the world responded to him.
In the land of Mordor, in the fires of Mount Doom, the Dark Lord Sauron forged in secret a Master Ring to control all others.
This later led to the introduction of the character Gollum and the Will of the One Ring. The ring is picked up by a hobbit named Bilbo Baggins, and this takes us to the present, where we see where Bilbo is today. It's not the shortest of backstories, but it gets out the necessary information in an understandable and acceptable manner, as well as with enough spacing and pacing to help us digest it. This is good exposition. Another method to give exposition is setting up an early tone. Sometimes it's best to save information for later. Get your audience invested by revealing something strange or exciting to them. For example, Harry Potter did this very well, particularly in the first movie, when the first setting we receive is a dark and misty night with an old man walking out of the shadows, wearing strange robes and a long beard. He extinguishes all the lights on the street, then sees a cat who he talks to.
I should have known that you would be here, Professor McGonagall.
The cat then transforms into a woman, and they begin talking urgently about some strange event that happened. And before you even have time to wrap your mind around this, a giant hairy man on a flying motorcycle crashes into the street while carrying a baby.
Professor Dumbledore, sir? Professor McGonagall?
Nope.
That's gripping. Without even being told the full context of what's going on, what the story's about, or who our protagonists are, we are already informed of various things. One is that this is a world of supernatural occurrences. Second is that things that appear ordinary can become extraordinary, that the simple isn't always what it appears to be. And third, that these individuals do not quite fit into the normal environment we understand. And as such, we will need to eventually find our way to the environment they came from to better understand their place in our world. This is a fantastic way to start a story. It gives you just enough questions that leaves you wanting more, but also a gripping start. But again, there are some risks involved. See, context is everything, and if you don't provide some kind of status quo for the readers to recognize, then the strange will not resonate. What do I mean by that? Well, consider for a moment that Harry Potter opens with Dumbledore, Hagrid, and McGonagall all meeting on a very ordinary street. The contrast between these three strange characters in the mundane evening street is what creates the oddity we are witnessing. But if the contrast was not created, like for example, let's say that these three were having their conversation and meeting in Hogwarts or in the Ministry of Magic, then the contrast wouldn't hit us as strongly. The audience might be met with whiplash, unsure of what kind of environment we were in, and unsure of the status quo or the stakes. Dumbledore, opening the scene by dimming the lights for secrecy, told us immediately what he didn't want people to see, that he didn't want himself or the others to be seen. They're a secretive bunch, not meant for normal eyes to see. But if this took place in Hogwarts, not only is the exposure to the school lessened for us as the viewer, but it makes us wonder how strange really are these figures. My point here being that it's important, if you're to set a tone, to establish a status quo from the offset. How strange are you going to make the story? How abnormal are your characters? If your story's about a werewolf, do you want to start with them waking up in a 21st century bedroom with torn clothes, ripped bed sheets, and them grumbling, "Not again"? That's a funny way to open a scene, a good opener. It makes us ask questions about what led to the simple "not again" scenario rather than a "what the hell happened" scenario. Create a status quo, a baseline for which the oddities or strangeness can grow from. Where do our characters begin their journey, and how will it elevate them beyond that point? Now, all of this is easier said than done. Generally, the best advice I can give you is to just risk it, There's this thing that runs in my family called approach avoidance. It means that the closer we come to something, the more nervous we get about doing it. Oh, there's a beach trip in 3 weeks? Sounds awesome. But with each passing day, I begin to grow more and more nervous. Oh man, do I really want to go? What if it rains and we're all miserable? That's a lot of gas to waste to go. And what if my friends don't come? What if it's boring? What if I get sunburnt? And soon I'm terrified to go. I was the same way with writing, and I think a lot of people are. We want to write. We're excited to put pen to paper and just create, but then we second guess ourselves. Oh man, will this be any good? What if no one likes it? Gosh, all the time I'm wasting. I'm not a good speller anyway. I can't describe this one scene. What if I get writer's block? Someone will laugh if they see this. No one's going to read it anyway, and then you abandon the project. I'll be really sincere for a moment. If you want to write, if you have an idea and want to see it created, then don't be afraid of how good or bad it will be. You have to take that step. Because even if you mess up, at least you will learn from that mistake. You have to treat mistakes in failed projects as a way to move on and get better, to learn from those mistakes. If you have to remind yourself that sometimes it's not about how other people view your work, it's about how you view it, then so be it, because that's the truth. Trust me, take my channel, take my YouTube channel. I might be the worst For Honor content creator on the YouTube platform. I'm garbage at the game. I know next to nothing about it, and most of my videos about For Honor are low quality compared to the god tier stuff of Marco Yolo, Vita Neon, Freeze, John the Liar, Slanderous, all these other people. And even my stuff that isn't For Honor, like these videos, are rarely watched and mostly ignored. But I don't just do them for the views or the subs or the likes, though those are nice. I do them because I love to do them, and I'm proud of them when I complete them. Even if only 100 people view this video, and that might well be the case, sometimes it's about stepping out of that comfort zone and taking a risk. Try something new. Show that idea you have. Present a new concept, because based on what I've seen in Hollywood and entertainment today, the world is starved of good stories. Let's show them a few good ones, huh? I think the greatest piece of advice I can give you in terms of starting a story is don't be sucked into the belief that you're not going to do well your first time, because I got news for you. You won't. Your first story will likely be terrible. Your first draft of your story will likely be terrible. It always is. Quite often, you will start a story and sit there, read the first chapter, and go, oh man, this is bad. This is cringe. I can't believe I wrote that. What was I thinking? But you can't be afraid of that outcome. You need to embrace that outcome. You need to say, all right, I didn't get this one the way I wanted. Let's find out why it didn't go the way I wanted and move on from there. Trial and error is the creator of success and victory. You have to learn how to take your wins with your losses. So the very best piece of advice I can give you in terms of starting a story is don't be afraid of failure. Be able to accept failure and accept that you will get better from it. And then in terms of how you get started, do you want to do an exposition dump? Do you want to do a tone setter? That's really up to you and the kind of genre you're going for. Horror stories tend to do much better with a tone setter. Fantasy stories tend to do much better with a exposition dump so that you can explain the fantasy world. So it really does depend on what you're trying to create. There's no exact science to it. But what I would do, really, is read other people's work, especially books, and watch movies that inspired you, see how they handle it. And then another piece of advice, if you're struggling with explaining or describing things, go on a walk and try to describe your environment as if you were talking to someone about it. And don't just say the grass is green, the leaves are green, the car is blue. No. Describe the sun on your skin. Describe if there's any wind. Is it a stale, windless day, or is it blowing the trees back and forth in a ripple? Sometimes you need to get very detailed to get the good descriptors, but other times, sometimes the bare bones basics is enough to sell what you need to. Like I said, there's no exact science. It's all about what works best for you. But the greatest hindrance to any writer is the fear of getting started. You overcome that fear, you'd be surprised what things you'll create. Well, I think that'll do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching this episode of The Raven's Writing Room, and I'll see you in my next video. Take care.